My name's Jay Hanley, State's Attorney here in Winnebago County. I want to introduce those standing behind me. To my left, to your right, is Chuck Davidson, Master Sergeant with the Illinois State Police. He's also the commander of the Winnebago Boone Integrity Task Force. To my right, your left, is Theo Glover. He's the co-chairman of the task force. He's also chief of the Rockford Park District Police Force. And David Ernest, who's the sheriff of Boone County. He's also the co-chairman of the task force. I thought I'd provide an outline for what we're going to talk about today. First, I'm going to give a background and some history of the task force, explain what it is and how it is activated. Master Sergeant Davidson will come up and talk a little bit about some of the facts of what we know from the incident that occurred both on Saturday with the county and on Sunday with the city. And so we'll refer to them in that way, the county versus the city. He'll also talk about the investigation, kind of what's been done so far. Obviously, we're very early in it, and what will be done in the future. And then I'll get back up and talk about the role of the state's attorney in this process. And lastly, I'll talk about transparency and how the public will be made aware of what's going on. First, let's talk about the task force. This may be a review for some of you all here, but I think it's important for the public to understand what it is and what it means. I've often said that in order for the public to have confidence in the result, they've got to have confidence in the process. And so the Winnebago Boone Integrity Task Force is a multi-agency task force specifically tasked with investigating instances of the use of deadly force, in custody deaths, or serious bodily harm. The task force is drawn from 15 law enforcement agencies in Winnebago and Boone County. Now, in 2016, the Illinois legislature passed the Police and Community Relations Improvement Act, which required such task force. It required independent investigation of officer-involved deaths. However, in Winnebago County and Boone County, we've had an integrity task force since June of 2010. So how does it work, and when is it activated? Well, the sheriffs and police chiefs within Boone and Winnebago County maintain the authority to activate the task force when an officer shooting occurs. So as an example, on Saturday, when a sheriff's deputy was involved in an officer-involved shooting, the sheriff, in this case Gary Caruana, contacted the integrity task force so that it would be activated. One other thing to note, that particular agency that's involved, so again, using Saturday as the example, the sheriff's deputy and the entire Winnebago County Sheriff's Office, they are not part of the investigation. They are not part of the task force. There's an independence there. The command structure, I mentioned that the commander is from the Illinois State Police, in this case it's Chuck Davidson. And then each investigation has its own squad leader. So in the county case, the squad leader is from Rockford Police Department, and that's Sergeant Swanson. In the city case, the Rockford City case, Sergeant Hughes of the Winnebago County Sheriff's Office is the squad leader in that case. All the crime scene investigation and other forensics is done by the Illinois State Police. So I'm going to call Sergeant Davidson up to the podium, and he'll discuss, again, what we know thus far about the two incidents, and then the status of the investigation and what will happen going forward.
Good afternoon. My name is Chuck Davidson, the commander of the Winnebago Boone County Integrity Task Force. The first case I'm going to talk about is the county officer-involved shooting. Approximately 11:30 a.m. on Saturday, April 10th, Winnebago County Sheriff's deputies responded to a call from a victim of a domestic disturbance near the Casey's located on Mulford and Harrison area. The deputies took a report and looked for the suspect in the 2100 block of Bellwort Drive in unincorporated Winnebago County. The suspect was not located and left prior to the deputies arriving. A deputy again responded to another call of domestic disturbance at approximately 5:45 p.m., again in the 2100 block of Bellwort Drive. The suspect was located outside of the home and resisted the deputy's orders and ran back into the residence. Backup deputies eventually arrived and entered the residence, and the suspect was located in the basement of the home holding a large metal pipe. The deputies instructed the suspect to drop the pipe several times. The suspect charged at the deputies, and they fired their weapons. The suspect was shot, given emergency care at the scene, and later transported to OSF St. Anthony's Medical Center, where he was later pronounced deceased. One deputy was struck in the head with a pipe by the suspect and knocked unconscious. The deputy was taken to OSF St. Anthony's Medical Center as well, treated and released. He was transported by officers at the scene. The Winnebago-Boone County Integrity Task Force was requested by Winnebago County Sheriff Caruana to handle the use of force investigation. The task force was activated and took over the scene at approximately 7 p.m. I'm also going to provide information on the Rockford police officer involved shooting that we had last night. On Sunday, April 11th, approximately 7 p.m., Rockford Police Department officers attempted to stop a vehicle near the area of Central and Michigan in Rockford, Illinois. The Rockford police officers located the vehicle a short time later in the 400 block of Illinois Avenue. Rockford police officers attempted to contact the vehicle's occupants. A passenger exited the vehicle, and after a short foot pursuit was initiated. The foot pursuit ended in an officer-involved shooting in the backyard in the area of 417 Illinois Avenue in Rockford. The suspect was transported to St. Anthony's Hospital with 9 life-threatening injuries. A handgun and a laser sight were recovered from the scene of the officer-involved shooting. Rockford Police Chief O'Shea requested the Winnebago-Boone County Integrity Task Force take over the investigation of the officer-involved shooting.
Yeah, why don't you start with the investigation?
Okay.
Sure.
State's Attorney Hanley, when we talk about the typical steps for an OIS investigation that we process and that we handle, I just did some basic things down here for you. One of the things we do, obviously, is a police interview of witnesses, including the family or suspect, when possible. We also, a secondary thing was a canvass of the neighborhood in the areas of the shootings, looking for witnesses that may have seen something either out their windows of their houses or otherwise. We process the scene with our crime scene investigators. We have a special unit in state police that comes up and handles all the forensics and collects the evidence, photographs, and does that kind of stuff. CSI will also collect the clothing, the guns, the weapons from the officers and suspects, anybody involved in the incident. We also do a video canvass of the area to see if there's any ring doorbells, anything that's prominent like that. Business cameras, anything like that we can find that may have information on it as well. Collection of all the body cams and squad car cams from the police personnel that were involved in the incident. Collection of all the 911 calls, radio traffic, hospital records. We also transport the evidence exhibits to the State Police Crime Lab here in Rockford. An example of that would be like DNA testing, firearms testing, fingerprints. Collect all the police reports from all the police officers on scene. So basically any officer that comes on scene is required to do a police report. We collect those. And at the end, we prepare a case file for the state's attorney's review at the conclusion of the investigation. The incidences we had over the weekend, obviously they just happened a few days ago. They're still in their infancy. Some of the things we've gotten completed so far is we've interviewed and located a lot of witnesses in both cases. Family interviews of the people involved, notifications on those as well. We've done a neighborhood canvass for witnesses. Sometimes we'll go back and do a secondary neighborhood canvass, depending on hitting them at different times of the day. Obviously, people work and are at their homes at different times of the day, so we'll hit them at different times of the day. We'll go back and do a secondary canvass. Processing of the scene by the CSI investigators and the scene evidence collection. So they process the scene, they'll collect all the evidence, and they'll submit it back to us. And we'll store it in our vault, and some of the items will be exhibited or will be transported to the State Police Crime Lab to be analyzed. CSI collection of the clothing, guns, weapons from the officers and suspects has been done, and we also completed a video canvass of the scene. We have several things to do on our to-do list. Currently, we have 2 squads working as State's Attorney Hanley alluded to earlier. The county shooting is being handled by Rockford Detective, Rockford squads with no county involvement. And therefore, the Rockford officer-involved shooting is being handled by a sergeant from he's the squad leader. And that's being handled from detectives from outside of the Rockford PD. To-do list, some things we still have left to do. We obviously have the collection of the body cams, squad car cams from all police personnel. We're working on the process of collecting all that right now, collecting all the 911 calls, radio traffic, hospital records. Still working on collecting all that. Collection of all police reports and from all the police officers at scene. Obviously, it takes them some time to write their police reports, get them over to us, get collected, for us to read through those and verify. Prepare and deliver any evidence exhibits to the crime lab. We're still working on that. And obviously, the last thing and the last step we do is prepare the investigative case file for review by the State's Attorney's Office. State's Attorney Hanley also wanted me to talk about the timeline for an OIS investigation. Obviously, it varies anywhere from 30 days to 6 months, depending on the amount of evidence, number of witnesses to be located and interviewed, and many other factors. The most important factor affecting the timeline of the case is usually the crime lab analysis. DNA analysis can take anywhere from 6 months to even longer, depending on the circumstances. So that's one of the holdups in these types of investigations, especially if DNA is involved. It usually makes it a more lengthy investigation for the officers, for everybody involved. With that, I'll turn it back over to State's Attorney Hanley.
Thanks, Sergeant. So I thought I'd talk about the role of the state's attorney in these types of incidents. First, I don't investigate, right? Our office doesn't investigate. That's up to the task force. However, we do aid and support in the investigation. As an example, if a warrant's necessary, we would review that warrant, and we do talk to the task force about different investigatory steps, but we're not the ones actually doing the investigation. The primary role of the state's attorney is actually the review of the investigation itself. And so they would present, the task force presents their report to the state's attorney's office, all the underlying evidence they've discovered, the reports, forensic evidence, and then we do an independent analysis to see whether the officer should be criminally charged or not. And it's important to note that we're not looking into issues such as administrative or civil issues for compliance and that. This is strictly a criminal issue. And so what's the standard in making a charging decision? Well, the prosecutor, in this case, me reviewing the case, will review all the evidence and applicable law. I will then consider whether the evidence is admissible. And after considering all the admissible evidence, the prosecutor, me, then determines whether the evidence can establish all the elements of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. This would also include the evaluation of potential defenses such as self-defense. Now, what's the specific standard? In a case like this, typically, in a use of force, an officer may use deadly force when, based upon the totality of the circumstances, the officer reasonably believes that deadly force is necessary to defend against an imminent threat of death or serious injury to the officer or others. Now, this is fairly general, right? There's a little bit more to it. I'm just trying to give you an idea of kind of the general standard and the specific standard that I'm bound by in these cases. I then make a decision. If I decide not to charge the officer, then I will actually release kind of a memorandum explaining the facts and the basis for that decision, and then much of the evidence will be disclosed at that time. The only caveat to that is, if someone is charged other than the officer in this incident, the reports and the investigation will not be disclosed because that case will still be ongoing. The most recent example is the Tyrus Jones case, right? Tyrus Jones was charged criminally, and so some of the information wasn't disclosed publicly because that case is still weaving its way through the criminal justice system. If I were to decide to charge, then you'd get basic information on the defendant's, the officer's name, what he or she is charged with, and then a relatively short statement of facts, like with any criminal case. So that's kind of my role in the process. I thought I'd talk a little bit about transparency. So I have prepared a memo that really talks about transparency in this process. You'll get it when you leave today. You'll also have it emailed to you. There was another memorandum that my predecessor prepared, and it's actually really informative. You'll also get that memorandum. Both of those will be posted on our website. Interestingly, our website's kind of a work in progress right now, and so we will get those up for the public, and it's Winnebago County State's Attorney. Is it .com or .org? .com, thank you. And so we will, and I will be as transparent as possible. We intend on having bi-weekly press conferences, and we anticipate those being on Thursdays at 2 p.m. It'll likely be not this Thursday, but the following Thursday. Obviously, if there's information in the interim, we could have a press conference or a press release to share information. I know if I stopped here, the first question that would be asked would be the videos. So there is dash cam and body cam video, and particularly in the county, there's body cam video. The answer there is really maybe. So the task force and our office will almost certainly not be releasing the videos. However, the sheriff's office could potentially release those videos. We will be in discussions with them about whether or not they'll be released. It will not happen in the next 24 hours. It will, I would anticipate, if it was released, being in the next 7 to 10 days. I understand the public's interest in these cases, and again, I promise to be as transparent as we can be. But I think it's important to note that this is still an investigation. Like anyone who's under investigation, there's a level of, we don't disclose investigations as we go. And so we have to be cognizant of preserving the investigation while also being as transparent as possible with the public. So I can take questions now.
I think you said that the county shooting started at there was a domestic call at a gas station. Was that what I understood?
It was the Casey's.
She went to the Casey's to report the domestic.
Oh, so, and that was an alleged incident of domestic violence.
Correct.
And the victim went to the Casey's to call the police.
Correct.
But they couldn't find the suspect then
That's correct.
until that night.
Correct.
Now, did they chase him into the house, or how would you describe how they got into the house?
I don't know if I want to go too much detail about what happened at the scene. I give you the brief synopsis if I could. I don't want to give you the whole case, so to speak, right here, but it's safe to say the suspect got back in the house. There was one officer responding at that time, initially.
And in the basement, there was more than one officer in the basement?
No.
No, there was only one officer in the basement.
Officers made entry in the house is all I'm going to say. They were encountered by the suspect coming from the basement.
But there was one officer who was hit in the head with a pipe.
Correct.
Is it the same officer that shot the suspect?
Yes.
Can you say how many times the suspect was shot?
I cannot.
How old is the suspect?
I'm going to jump in here. So we're not releasing the names today or any information about either the deceased, the injured, or even the officers. That will come in a press release. I want to release those all at the same time. We have some issues with notification of the family members, and so I don't want to piecemeal it. Jeff, we are going to release the names of both the officers involved and the deceased and the injured. Again, I think it'll be by the end of the week.
Just going off on that, historically when we hear from police, domestic violence calls seem to be, some of the most dangerous they encounter. I guess if someone can kind of talk to that and I guess what we see, historically with these types of scenes.
I can only confirm that, yes, all calls can be dangerous. Domestic violence calls are often the most dangerous.
What's the condition of the officer who was hit in the head?
So that's a medical issue. We're not going to disclose that today.
I guess kind of talking to what you brought up with transparency, in the past when we've covered this task force getting involved, kind of what we hear from the community is they have concerns because it's law enforcement, investigating other local law enforcement. So I guess what would you say to those concerns and for them to kind of, I guess, understand that process better?
That we're complying with Illinois law. I mean, I don't know what else to say to that.
Just to be clear, the deputy that was knocked unconscious was also the deputy that fired his weapon, killing the suspect.
It was the deputy that fired the weapon.
And he was the one that was unconscious afterward. He was knocked unconscious afterward?
Again, we're not going to get into that level of detail. We're less than 48 hours from that incident. And for the integrity of the investigation, that level of detail is not going to be disclosed at this time.
And I guess going back, you talked about the decision of releasing video and kind of how that would shake out. And I guess maybe for kind of the public to understand, because when they look to other cases, big cases nationally, they'll see, even when we look at like Brooklyn Center today, the video, immediately released. So is that, I guess, a policy more specific to, our county state's attorney's office, to a state statute? So that people can kind of, I guess, understand our process.
Sure. So there's a couple different answers. First, the memo that I'm going to give you today will answer that with a level of detail. This is all somewhat uncharted territory, both here locally, but even nationally. While you may have a video released almost immediately, there are more videos that are never released. I think the more typical situation is that the videos are not released. There are some high-profile examples where they are, and there's different timing, right? Sometimes they're done within 24 hours, sometimes it's a week later, sometimes it's when the investigation's all over, the videos are released. We are navigating that. I have certain ethical and legal obligations that, again, I put in the memo. It doesn't really translate to a press conference like this. I would encourage you to read that. And so we're working on navigating that. And again, understanding it's a little bit different than it was even 5-10 years ago, the expectations of the public. But as I mentioned, we have to balance my ethical and legal obligations while also preserving the investigation. All that being said, I think it is more likely that the video will be released than it was, let's say, 3 or 4 years ago if we were up here doing this. There's been a bit of a change throughout the law enforcement community.
The bi-weekly press conferences that you were talking about, is that obviously to give us updates on these incidents, is that correct?
That's right, and there may be some where there's maybe not a whole lot to discuss, and there may be others where there are. I think it's important to not just have this and then say, we'll see you in 8 weeks. As I mentioned, I want everyone to have confidence in the process itself. And so, I can't promise what level of detail we'll have at the press conferences, but I did want to let everyone know that we'll have some kind of cadence and schedule.
And I think especially, this kind of like we've been saying, grabs the public's interest. It's been in 2 days, and you kind of want to keep that transparency going.
I do. Also recognizing that because it's only been, in one case, basically 48 hours, another 24, there hasn't, a lot's happened, but at the same time, there's still a lot to be done. And so there's limited information.
So, just to be clear, you're not going to identify the officers involved until when?
It'll likely be Thursday or Friday this week.
Okay. And what about the, for lack of a better word, suspects?
Same.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't want to, I wanted to release all the names at the same time. And so I didn't want to kind of piecemeal it.
And that'll be probably this week?
Yes.
Thursday or so. Okay.
And I guess going off of, obviously we're talking a lot about, transparency, and I guess given, the year that we've had and the tension between police and communities, I guess any message you want to give to the public about, again, to just kind of reiterate, the importance of this process, in these types of cases.
Well, I think it's the importance of the independent review and kind of the weight of this job. But beyond that, I have to, I've mentioned this even in our discussions. From my standpoint, I am completely neutral, right? I have seen very limited evidence. I won't see much evidence until it's presented to me by the Integrity Task Force. And then I have to make the very, the legal decision as to whether criminal charges should be brought or not.
The deputy and the officer, are they on leave right now? What's the policy for that?
So I would refer to the specific agencies. I honestly don't know what their status is.
Regarding the city, why were officers trying to stop that vehicle?
we're not going to speak to that. And I'm not sure we know that either. Either way, we're not going to share that today.
What kind of gun was it? That was recovered?
Talking about the Rockford incident?
Yes.
We're not gonna speak to that either. Like I said, it's a 24-hour investigation, we just started it. I don't even have the gun in our evidence yet, our CSI clerks have it, and they're processing it. They'll turn it over to us at a later date, so.
For the officer or the deputy carrying a taser, can you tell us that?
Okay, so, no, but please be specific as to whether you're talking about the county or the city case. But in either case, we're not going to answer that question today. All right, thank you. If you have anything further, you can reach out to our office. I appreciate you being here. And then I think either Rita or Renee have the handouts for you, and you can get on the website if you need it.
They have all 4 names on there? All four?
No, it does not. If you want me to give you those names, I can do that real slow now. It's not on the, so you've got, again, to my left, you're right, Chuck Davidson, pretty much common spelling, that's Davidson.
Title?
A Master Sergeant with the Illinois State Police. He's also the commander of the Winnebago-Boone County Integrity Task Force. Then you've got Theo Glover, Glover. He's the chief of the Rockford Police Department. I'm sorry, Rockford Park District Police Department. And he's the co-chairman of the task force. And then David Ernest, Ernest. He's the sheriff of Boone County and the co-chairman of the task force.
Chuck, are you also investigating the Freeport shooting?
Lena, you mean?
Yeah, Lena. Excuse me.
Yes, state police, not the task force.
Yeah, but you're in charge of that?
I am.
I was wondering if you could tell us anything about that shooting.
If you wanna get with me later, we can talk about it. Not up here.
Okay. Very good.
All right, thanks again, everybody. If we don't see you beforehand, likely not this Thursday, next.
I just want to make sure, Master Sergeant of
And we'll
the
confirm
State
that.
Police, Chuck Davidson, and you are the